Morning everyone. So a little bit of a change of tact. As Sue said, I'm going to chat a little bit about water. So this is a pulled together presentation from a number of different projects over the last 5 years when we started working in Cathedral Peak. So the first thing is we live in a country where we have very low rainfall. A lot of our areas are below 450 mils a year. Added to that, we have a very high potential evaporation. So on average, less than 9% of our rainfall makes it into our river systems. 98% of our readily available surface water is already committed for use. We have a fast-growing population, which is not stopping, and our attitude towards water is towards supply-driven management. So what I mean by that is we'd rather build another dam than cut demand and look at education. And we've got water quality problems that are aggravating that. So we have a highly water-stressed situation. So water scarcity is a very big issue that we deal with. If we look at that a little bit more than 50% of our water is produced from about 10% of our land surface area. So this is a recent project that's just been completed by David Lemaitre, and they've mapped the strategic water source areas in South Africa, combination of the groundwater and surface water areas. So these areas shown here supply 50% of the population, 70% of irrigation demand, and 64% of the economic activity. But very little attention is being paid to conserving these areas or to understanding the nature of change impacts on these areas. And this is more so if we look at the high altitude areas. So if we look particularly this sort of block over here where we've got the very high altitude Drakensberg regions, we don't understand what the impacts of change generally in those areas on these strategic water source areas will be. And quite often this is due to limited data in these areas. They're inaccessible and we don't have the data that's there. And our climate models often aren't that good in those areas. But this is where the long-term monitoring at Cathedral Peak really comes to the fore and offers us an opportunity to be able to understand what the potential impacts of global change on these high-altitude systems could be. So for those of you who might not know, I'm sure most of you do, the Cathedral Peak research catchments were established in 1945 in response to growing concerns around the impacts of commercial afforestation on water. They very soon figured out what those impacts were and how negative they were, and that was in around sort of late 1960s, and from then they turned into a set of catchments to look at broader land management treatment issues. And they've had a very significant influence on South African hydrological research over the years, but more importantly on our national water policy. So it started from 1968, you see an influence of the research coming from these catchments on our water policy, and that continues to date. Unfortunately, in 1995, the monitoring ceased, but in 2012, SAON started to pick this up and re-establish the monitoring in these catchments. From 2012 to now, we've established a fairly dense array of networks, a monitoring network across the catchments. And there's a long list of what we've got there at the moment. So we've got this period of very nice historical data, and now we're starting to generate a fairly long record of current data. So what I've got here now is we went through and we analyzed the historical records to start looking for a trend, and then I'll pick up on what we're seeing now in the current day. So this is trends in the rainfall records from 1949 to 1983 using the Mann-Kendall test, and where it's a red circle, it's a negative trend. Seasonally, we only saw trends in the autumn months, so we sort of started to see quite a strong trend towards a decline in rainfall over the historical record. And that was sort of amplified when we started to look at the streamflow trend. So using the same Mann-Kendall test, we started to see strong declines in the streamflow records in that historical period. This is now the current day situation. So we've been monitoring since August 2012. I've taken full calendar year from January 2013 to it ends on the 31st of October 2019. These are the deviations from the monthly mean. So what that is each month, so this year October against the historical mean, that's the deviation that's shown here. And this is an accumulation of those deviations over the years. It's not looking great. So if you pull out what's there, 20 months out of 82 we've had below average rainfall. Sorry, that should be below average rainfall, that's a typo. 6 years, all the 6 years where we've had a full record are below average. And 2019, there's nowhere where we're going to hit the average, so we'll be sitting at 7. We've seen some records. We've had the driest December on record, that was December 2018, and this October was the driest October that we've had on record. We've also had the wettest July on record. We had 116 mils the 1 July. It was unheard of. We haven't seen that before. This year, we are currently sitting in a deficit of 792 millimeters if we want to hit the long-term mean. We ain't going to get there unless we have a September 87, but not even then. So you might say, okay, we might have had this in the past, and yes, I agree. These are the droughts in the past. So this is this is going back in the historical record. There's a drought around 1970, the drought around the 1980s, and you can see a fairly sustained long period where we were below mean annual precipitation. What's different now is that those values, those deviations from the annual mean are far greater than what they were before. And this is excluding 2019. If I put the 792, it would have been sitting down there. What does that then translate to into the streamflow? So this is from, our streamflow record starts a little bit later than our rainfall, so from September 2013 to present day. You can see the lagged response in the streamflow. These catchments have a phenomenal ability to store water and to be able to overcome some of these deficits in rainfall, but that is not going to continue forever. So just to sort of show you that lag in a little bit of an easier way to understand it, that's the mean rainfall over the current period against the historical. So you can see the drop, and here the stream flow, and you can see how that sort of flow periods there is lagged. We've not only been looking at the stream flow and rainfall, but looking at sort of other aspects, and what we've got here is the standardized precipitation index, looking at the droughts. So these are 1980 to 89, so we've got 4 periods of 10 years each, and what you can see is the near normal conditions are occurring far less frequently, and your extremes are expanding on both ends. So we're getting more wet and more dry. The fire danger index, so this is a low-felt fire danger index. We've got 5-year intervals. We've got 3 of them. And we're starting to see changes here as well. What's interesting is the relative humidity going up is skewing this. So it looks, we seem to have less fire danger, and this is influenced by the relative humidity. So if we kind of bring that back, what does this mean? So these Drakensberg areas supply the Maluti-Drakensberg, 4.51% of our national mean annual runoff. The Northern Drakensberg, 4.94% of South Africa's mean annual runoff. It seems fairly substantial, and when you drill down a little bit further to look at what that actually means, those areas are supplying 19% of the water input to the Vaal system from the Northern Drakensberg, nearly 35% of the input to the Vaal water system from the Maluti-Drakensberg. Beyond that, the Northern Drakensberg supplies 100% of Ladysmith's demand, 80% of Newcastle's, and 20% of Richards Bay. If you take the economic aspects of those areas, there's a very heavy dependence on these high-altitude regions. But only 10% of the Northern Drakensberg is protected. Currently, we're sitting in a massive drought situation. Katsi Dam is at 13%. And the Vol system, to keep water, they've been instructed to keep water usage constant until 2026. They have no further capacity. So with population growth and economic growth, they actually need to reduce water use because they have nothing spare. We keep looking at this from one aspect in terms of climate change, but what we understand is that the land use is going to have almost a greater impact on the water resources from these systems than what we'll be seeing out the climate. We've got massive issues with degradation, woody encroachment, agriculture, irrigation demands, growing rural populations, growing urban populations. And this, we've known this for a long period of time, but we're not starting to see a greater protection of these areas given the importance of them. So in conclusion, we're going to see continued need for and pressure on our water resources. We need to change that mindset and shift away from a supply-driven nature to more of a trying to control the demand on water. And I think that call's been made a number of times at this event. We can see the changes in climate, but what we don't really understand fully yet is the nature of the land cover, land use changes, and what these are going to mean for the hydrological responses out of these catchments. And what's really important to understand is the hydrological response is nonlinear. So what that means is if you get 10% in rainfall and your land cover changes by 10%, it doesn't mean you're going to get a 20% change in your stream flow. You're going to have far greater influence if you combine the two together. And that brings me to the end.